My name is Moira Bell. I'm the chairman of Riverside School Board on the South Shore of Montreal, and proud to say that I'm a member of the steering committee of this conference. Now, remember that feeling in high school? Now, remember that feeling in high school, heading into the class with that singularly inspiring teacher who stood out from the rest, who made the War of 1812 actually fascinating, who made the calculation of the hypotenuse of the triangle a real revelation? Come on, you're still young enough to remember that. Well, pull out your pens and notebooks. We are all about to learn something valuable from four masters of the art, the science, and the craft of retail politics. Now, if you treat that concept, retail politics, as a demeaning expression, I'm sorry, you're probably at the wrong convention. Let's face it, we trustees and commissioners are universally elected politicians, and understanding, practicing, and improving upon that craft is our responsibility. Now, it's time to get some pointers from five of the very best. Let me introduce you to them. First, Canada's former Deputy Prime Minister, Sheila, has worked in the elected service of her country for some 19 years, as a community activist long before that, and as a national broadcaster, author, and consultant ever since. Among her long list of accomplishments in government, Ms. Copps presided over the banning of development in Canada's national parks. She created the first ever action plan for diversity, including broadcasting hiring targets for Aboriginal peoples, women, and minorities. She oversaw the creation of the UNESCO Cultural Diversity Instrument, ultimately adopted as international law by more than 150 countries. And in everything she did, Ms. Copps built lasting relationships with key players in the voluntary sector across Canada, with particular emphasis on the province of Quebec. Thank you. Mr. Warren Allmand was first elected to Parliament in 1965 for Montreal NDG, and subsequently re-elected, wait for it, 8 times. Mr. Allmand was Solicitor General, Minister of Indian and Northern Affairs, and Minister of Consumer and Corporate Affairs in the Trudeau governments of 1972 to 1979. He later served as president of the International Center for Human Rights and Democratic Development, then lectured in human rights at McGill University from 2003 to 2012. He went back to his political roots and served as a Montreal City Councillor from 2005 to 2009. Throughout that time, Warren has embodied the emblems of integrity, accountability, and dedication that mark true public service. Madame Meili Faille is a former Bloc Québécois Member of Parliament for Vaudreuil-Soulanges, Quebec. She served with distinction in Parliament from 2004 through 2011 as the Bloc Québécois critic for matters related to citizenship and immigration, intergovernmental affairs, human rights, and public accounts. Prior to being elected, Meili was project leader and primary consultant for IBM Group LGS. She is a former project manager, ministerial writer, and political intern for the Secretary General of the Canadian Human Rights Commission and the cabinets of the Minister of Physical Education and Amateur Sports, Solicitor General, and Minister of Northern, Canadian, and Indian Affairs. Mr. Mr. Peter G. White is the former Principal Secretary to Prime Minister Brian Mulroney and Special Assistant for Appointments in the Prime Minister's office. Earlier, he served as Special Assistant to Federal Minister Maurice Sauvé and to Quebec Premier Daniel Johnson. Mr. White was born in Brazil and educated in Quebec and Switzerland. He received his Bachelor of Arts from McGill in 1960 and his law degree from Université de Laval in 1963. He is currently chairman of Bromont Capital Partners Incorporated. Now, to ride herd over this powerful panel, an old friend of CSBA's who knows a thing or two about small and big P politics. He's a former president of the Canadian School Boards Association, the Quebec English School Boards Association, former chair of the Lester B. Pearson School Board, and a dear friend. Ladies and gentlemen, join me now in welcoming your Retail Politics panel and its moderator, Mr. Marcus Tabachny.
Well, good afternoon, everybody, and I can tell you I am really impressed to see such a full room here on Friday afternoon in Quebec City with the sunshine the way it is. We have an amazing hour and a half for you with some of the best minds in retail politics. Was it something I said? Or something I'm about to say? I very much, I mean, one of the things that you have to understand is, and you all know, the perks of the job of being a trustee or commissioner are limited, to say the least. But one of the really cool things that I get to do as a former president of this association, from time to time, is I get to meet, sit, and today moderate a panel of this caliber, and just to be on stage with them and to have been introduced so politely as amongst this group was quite an honor to me. So this is like really cool for me. I think at my age I'm allowed to say really cool. The format we're going to follow this afternoon is we're going to ask each of our guests to speak for 5 to 10 minutes. I'm going to give them an opportunity, if they so desire, to respond if they hear something that either they don't agree with or something that they would like to follow up on. And then, ladies and gentlemen, it's going to be up to you. This is a rare opportunity for you to get information and advice from the people who have been there, who really understand what retail politics means in today's world. Just as a bit of a background, retail politics was a term that was first coined about 100 years ago. And it meant at that time the fine art of buying votes. It has now evolved into the fine art of cultivating votes. And it is an art, and it is a skill, and it's something that whether you've been a trustee for 6 months or for 25 years, it's a skill you need to continuously hone, learn, and learn from the best. So it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker. He's already been introduced, but to call on our first speaker, Mr. Peter G. White.
Alors, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président Marcus et chers collègues à ce fameux panel. Je vais suivre l'exemple de notre Premier ministre en commençant mon discours en français. Nous sommes ici dans la vieille capitale de la province de Québec, où je n'ai pas eu l'honneur de grandir, mais j'ai fait mon cours universitaire en droit à l'Université Laval, et c'était parmi les plus beaux jours de ma vie. So it's a great pleasure and an honor for me to be here with you today. Thank you very much for including me in this very impressive panel. I note that it's an extremely balanced panel. There's one former blockiste, one conservative, and 2 liberals. which is only fair. I mean, and I thought that perhaps I should demonstrate my bona fides as a real conservative. So I don't think you can probably see this, but what it is, it says on it, Conservative Convention 08, Congrès Conservateur 08. So this is just to prove that I was actually there. Now, the thing is, I can't guarantee you that it was 2008. It might well be 1900. But I do have that. And I would suspect that I may well be, I won't say I'm certainly not the only conservative in this room, because I know there are many people here who are from outside Quebec, but I may well be the only conservative from Quebec in this room. So I would just like to start by a few general reflections, and then I am going to refer back to the points that were suggested that we looked at by the organizers. I'm just going to state a few obvious things, but they're important. School trustees are politicians, whether they admit it or not. They are elected officials occupying a public trust under the law, and they're accountable for their actions to their electors and to the provincial government. We won't talk about the pay scale. Like municipalities, most school boards are creatures of the provinces, and they exist at the pleasure of the provincial legislature. An exception would be school boards for First Nations communities, which are established by the Department of Indian and Northern Affairs Canada and not under provincial legislature. I'm going to read you a story, this may have come up earlier in this convention, I don't know, from the Victoria Times columnist from last Sunday, Canada Day, July 1st, that hammers home the reality of provincial control and also the reality that board members are very much in politics. The headline, Abbott fires Cowichan School Board for not submitting balanced budget. New official trustee appointed, by Sydney E. Harnett, Times columnist. The 9-member Cowichan Valley School Board has been fired and an official trustee appointed in their place after the board failed to submit a balanced budget, Education Minister George Abbott announced Sunday. In an interview Sunday, Abbott accused the board of political grandstanding. The school board said it plans to appeal. School board chairwoman Eden Haythornthwaite, does she happen to be here in the room? No, said, there you go, she got fired, so she didn't come. She said, the school board voted 5-4 last month to approve a budget of more than $3.7 million in the red because a majority of trustees felt that they could no longer continue to cut the district's budget and still provide quality education. And she goes on to explain what she did. And then I love a comment that she made, which was very political. She said that the minister, Mr. Abbott, chose Canada Day to fire all the school board trustees. And she thought that that was not a proper thing to do. Now, there is another exception, which we ought to know about, to the right of a province to abolish a school board, and that exception is that where a school board represents a large official language community in a province, its existence may be guaranteed under Section 23 of the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, the Constitution Act of 1982. And this was the view that was taken by the Supreme Court in a very important 1990 case of Meili versus Alberta, province of Alberta. So those boards cannot be abolished by the province even if they want to. So now I will go on to the points that we were asked to have a look at. The first question was, how would you define retail politics? And how does that definition lead to effective and responsible public service? Well, if you're starting out in retail politics, this is a good rule. It's not very easy to follow, but if you can, you should. The first thing you always do is you take a poll. Now, I'm not saying you have to hire a polling organization and spend several $1,000s to take a poll. That would be unlikely for most school board elections. But you should at least take a poll of your friends and neighbors. Ask them what they think about whether you should run for the school board, what they think the issues are, and whether or not they might consider supporting you. And I had an experience in my early life where I ran for an election in Broome County, where I'm from, and my own family didn't vote for me. And that's not unusual. Second, you need a strategy. Now, what do I mean by a strategy? It doesn't have to be a 90-page document. Just a few points on a piece of paper. What it means is, who are you going to appeal to, and what are you going to say to them? Who is the constituency that you're looking to get to go out and vote for you, and why are you going to try and explain to them and persuade them that they should get out and vote for you? So what is your program? Then there's nothing like going door to door. Nothing like going door to door. That's the very best way to get to know what people are thinking. It's much better than a poll if you do enough of it. This is straying a little bit from the topic, but it's an interesting point. I'm still involved in the Conservative Party in the province of Quebec, and the party just allowed us finally to set up regional councils here. And I've got myself appointed secretary of 2 of them. I reminded people that the only title that Stalin ever had was secretary of the Communist Party. So I'm the secretary of these 2 regional councils. And we had a meeting in one of them, and a fellow was saying he'd been going door to door north of Joliette. And he said, it's astonishing the degree to which Quebecers identify with the party and the policies of the party and the program of the party. But then one man said to him, and I'll translate this if I have to, "Ton calice de Harper."
It's pretty clear.
Everybody understand that? So you need to measure public opinion, and that's a very good way of doing it. You have to get to know the mass media to the extent that there still are any mass media in our communities. Maybe there aren't any mass media in some of your communities. I mean, there probably is a weekly newspaper, there may be a community radio station, and if you're in a larger community, there will be daily newspapers. You must get to know the media. You must get to talk to them and get them to know you and establish a personal link with them. Social media, that's the big thing nowadays. You must have a Facebook page, and a Facebook page is even more important than a website. A website tends to be static, and it takes an awful lot of work to keep it up. People often don't bother looking at it. Get yourself a Facebook page. And if you're not of my generation, and it may be true of most of us on this panel, start tweeting on Twitter. That's very important, so that people know that you're out there and doing things and saying stuff. Public meetings. If there are any public meetings, go to them. If there aren't any, call one. If there is a PTA or a home and school association or any kind of parent group, go and talk to them. Be asked to be invited to one of their meetings, go and talk to them, get to know what they're up to. Never go into debt. Now, this is not something that most school trustee candidates are at risk of, but I just would point out to you what recently was decided by a court in relation to, I won't mention the party that these people belong to, but Martha Hall Findlay, Joe Volpe, and Penny Fry, all of whom were told, sorry, you can't take any more time to pay back your election campaign debts, you have to pay them back now. So don't go into debt. It's not necessary, but you'll be astonished how many people do it. Next point. Would you lead us through one political accomplishment or challenge that best exemplifies your personal practice of retail politics? Well, I could go on for a long time about this. I'm not going to. I've lived in 3 provinces. I've lived in Quebec, I've lived in Ontario, I've lived in Alberta, I've worked in Ottawa, Quebec City, London, Ontario, and Foster and Knowlton, Quebec. And there's a number of things I've done at all of these levels, including I was instrumental in getting Brian Mulroney elected to the leadership of the Conservative Party, second time around. We didn't make it the first time. And then I was, once we'd done that, it was almost a foregone conclusion that he was going to become Prime Minister, which he did with 211 seats in the country. But I think that the most interesting thing that I've ever done in politics, and this is much more at home to what you're talking about, is something that was called the Association for Reform in Education. This was set up in Quebec in the late 60s and early 70s by the then principal of McGill University, Rock Robertson, and by Joseph Paget, who had been at that time, was at that time the chairman of the Catholic School Commission of Montreal, which no longer exists. And it was in response to the Saint-Léonard school crisis. Now, I won't go into detail about that, but what happened in a nutshell was that a group, a political group, got themselves elected to the Saint-Léonard School Board in Montreal in the late 1960s, and they passed a regulation that every non-Francophone student within their school board had to take all their education in French. This created an immense explosion, as you can imagine, It rocked the provincial government. They tried to figure out what to do with it. It was Jean-Jacques Bertrand who was the premier. And in the end, he failed. He introduced a couple of bills that didn't work, Bill 60 and 63, 62 and 63. But it was just fascinating. It was absolutely grassroots politics. We held hearings around the province. We had a committee of a large number of people, all from the education community. We presented briefs in Quebec City. And I'm not saying we got very far, but we made the effort. And that's really an experience that I will never forget. I'm almost coming to the end here, Mr. Chairman, in case you're worried. All right, he is. School trustees and commissioners are constituency politicians. They must serve an entire school district's territory while answering to a specific geographical constituency within it. Can you offer 2 or 3 characteristics or practices that define effective and honorable constituency politics? I'll do this in point form very quickly. Honesty and integrity. Always, always tell the truth. Be utterly transparent. Diligence. Master your files. Show up at all meetings. And a senator, this time he's a conservative senator, just learned the importance of that. Senator Brazeau was just outed as being the senator that has spent the least amount of time in the Senate. And he reminded me of Hugh Siegel's wonderful definition of the Senate, which is a taskless thanks. Outreach. Outreach. Don't wait for your constituents to come to you. Go to them. Respect. Never make personal attacks. Never cast aspersions on other people. Always respect parents, students, teachers, and administrators, even when you don't agree with them. Remember why you became a trustee or a commissioner, or why you want to. Unlike Ted Kennedy, some of you may remember, he was on national television, and he was asked, why do you want to be president, Mr. Kennedy? And he didn't have an answer. He bumbled and stumbled, and that was the end of Ted Kennedy. Reach out. Publicize all your board meetings, and make them as interesting and as informative as possible, with a question period open to all comers. Why are turnouts for school board elections lower than the IQ of a snail? The answer is apathy, ignorance, and a feeling of impotence. Finally, Mr. Chairman, this is the end here. How does an elected politician truly engage constituents at a time when there is such pervasive cynicism about politics at every level, including school boards? Well, there's no point in pretending that this is not a challenge. But it is not just cynicism. It is a lack of interest or a feeling of belonging or of being wanted. I'll just leave you with a point. This is a serious academic theory. It's called the theory of rational ignorance. Now what it says is that if you feel that you're one voter among hundreds or thousands or millions, and you only have a right to cast a vote once every 2 or 3 or 4 years, and the issues that are involved are terribly complex and your vote is not likely to count for much, why should you waste any time boning up on the issues and getting out of bed and going and voting? Why should you bother? It's very rational, unfortunately, and that's why a great many people don't vote. And that is the challenge that we have to face. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. White. You know, I was going to tell the panel, and I thought better, I was going to tell the panel that I'm going to signal you and I want you to stop, and you know, you have to.
I didn't see a thing.
And I was going to say, just, you know, think of me as your Speaker of the House, and then I read what these people did to the Speaker of the House, and I decided I didn't want to be treated that badly. Of the 4 panelists, there is one that I did come to know because Meili Faille was actually an MP on the territory of the school board that I was part of for many years. Now, Ms. Faille and I might not necessarily agree on our political leanings, but when it comes to true art of retail politics, I could always count on her for her grassroots support of what we as an English school board needed. When we needed new schools, she was the first to show up at a press conference, the first to write a letter of support, and she knew what it meant to connect with her voters. And when David Birnbaum asked me if I knew of somebody who would fit the definition of a retail politician, Meili Faille's name came to mind. So it is a real pleasure for me, with all of her faults and her political beliefs, to introduce to you Meili Faille.
one thing of being politicians, you can have lots of kisses too. You don't just kiss babies. Bonjour à tous et bienvenue à Québec. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi de m'adresser à vous. It's a great pleasure for me to speak to you today. A year ago, I was still a member of parliament, but fate happened and I was out, I don't know, who's to? Or I don't know the expression, but anyway, defeated by someone from the NDP, which apparently only had his parents in the riding and was not even living in the riding. And ironically, if I didn't fix his immigration file for his family, he wouldn't be in Canada. But it only took me 2 weeks to come over defeat, because when I look back at the past, my past, I spent 3 campaigns, really good campaign, working hard in a riding which has about 21% Anglophone. Not an easy riding for the bloc, but still winning with 4,000 votes margin. And then the next election defeated the famous astronaut, Canadian astronaut, Mark Garneau, for 8,000 votes, and then defeated a conservative, Michael Fortier, which was very known in the banking industry, with 12,000 votes. And still maintained in the last election almost the same number of votes that I carried out in the last election. But what happened in my case is that the Liberal votes and the Conservative votes went down almost 10%, at 10%. So these votes were casted to the NDP, which made the NDP win. But today, I'm as popular in the riding and more, because I have more free time to do retail politics than when I was a member of parliament. My experience with the English community goes back many years. I don't know if there's anyone from CBR in the room here, or anyone from Lester B. Pearson. Someone from CBR? So, like you mentioned to me just a few seconds ago, I'm Yvonne Faille's daughter. My father was head teacher in the English School Board, helped put in place 6+, which is helping the English community to learn French. And those who've done 6+, which was a transition year between grade 6 and high school. A lot of them are very famous in Toronto, came back, and now lives in my riding. And in the last campaign, I must say, I had in my winning party, the first time in 2004, I think that I had half of the room which was English-speaking people, half of the room was a French-speaking, and at every town hall meetings, I had people from the English community coming and helping in the campaign, which was strange for someone from the bloc, and having English people doing my telephones. So it's really, really fun to do politics. I grew up in a political environment. So starting off with my father also being a commissioner, doing campaign door to door with my dad, with René Lévesque in 1976. And at the time I was the baby my father was kissing along. So I was only 4 years old. Then came along some campaign in 81, 84, 86. And I think I don't have enough of my fingers. I would have to borrow others' fingers to know how many campaigns I've made. All in the writings that are difficult. But in my past, I must say I'm very happy that since 1976, I've met all Quebec's prime minister. I grew up with their children. I've gone to Ottawa as well and worked for the Conservatives and worked also under the Liberals until the Bloc exists. So, and always defending people from Quebec. So our views was different. I was like my bio was shortened, but it's quite long. And in my spare time, I sat on as a board of director on many charitable organizations. I was doing fundraising, and at the same time getting organized for elderlies as well, and hospitals, and also with the daycare for the young people in Quebec. So I was traveling across Canada to explain the $5 daycare system that we have in Quebec, and work as a counsel at the Ministère des Affaires Sociales in Quebec. So It's quite interesting. Retail politics, I think the first thing that you need to do is ask yourself, what would make you work so many long hours? What would make you go out and what's your mission? What would make you go out and do a door-to-door and speak to constituents? And this is, I think, the fun part of my job was to do door-to-door, to do phone calls, and to go to every happening. In my riding, there was 23 municipalities. So can you imagine how many local organizations that there existed? At the same time of meeting those people, you had to have something to talk to them. So you had to have on your fingers all of the various hot issues, and also what your position, what your solution could be. So if I had an easy way of explaining retail politics, I wrote it in big here. Get off the shelf. You're the product. You're the person that people want to buy. You have to go out and make yourself remarkable. And coming from the IBM perspective, from technology, you can't avoid technology. But going, like Mr. White said, going off and having a website, it's probably not the right tool. But Facebook and Twitter is the generation. This is where you have to be at the minimum. Traditionally, you have to focus on local events, meeting individual voters. But make no mistake, the handshakes, the speeches at coffee shops, house parties, and all those public events like press conference do have their weight in the decision of the voters. So nowadays, national politics is probably just annoying people. And really, people won't change their mind from the ads that they see on TV. Look at the impact of robocalls and TV ads in political campaign. What made the difference in the last campaign in Quebec was Tout le monde en parle. It's a TV show, talk show, and the leaders, my leader, didn't look very good at that show. And that's probably the most popular TV show in Quebec. So from that day, in my door-to-door, personally, in my phone calls to constituents, it was not a strong yes. It was yeah. So when you feel that yeah, you know that you're losing some grounds. And because it happened so late in the campaign, you don't have time to recuperate. So the only thing was left was to keep the people around you active and very motivated. My campaign was never run by anyone older than 25 years old. My main campaign director was 18. So I've always put my faith in young people, like my dad did, okay? I follow my dad everywhere, my uncles, my aunt, in every possible event. And I've put my faith to young people because school board might be even more important, because what happened in school is what is the most important thing in their life, and this is what is going to make them grow and become a real citizen. So one thing that I never encountered as a problem was to meet the young people, because apart from being a politician, people never perceive me as a politician. People always perceive me as the person from the community, which allow me and give me a lot of leverage to be able to go in those schools and talk to them about issues, environment issues, and see what they wanted to work on. So one of my main projects, which I was rewarded on the Hill, was to win a prize for being able to get 50,000 children across Canada to sign a letter to the Prime Minister as to how to have a more secure environment. What would they do in their local life? But this meant for me a lot of time to bring in a campaign and then talk to the children, bring up a video, and support teachers throughout the whole campaign. So 6 minutes is not very long, but if I had to give you an advice, there's nothing better than being with the people. There's nothing better to defend them and build with them something that is very dear to them. And that's why I still do politics, and that's why I live from politics now. Because people come to me and says, oh, you know how to do this. And then they hire me, and my rates are very low, so, and I do that for fun. And I like to see the results. So what really drives me was always not to be the first person on the line, but working background, getting my network to help out, and to see the result. I want results. So that's probably my talk was to give you a chance to see what's the most important is to build something with the people. Thank you.
Our next speaker is going to be the Honorable Warren Allmand. Warren Allmand, if you want to know what it means to be a retail politician, Mr. Allmand, who has spent many years in public life and has attained some of the highest honors and offices, can walk through his community and virtually everybody knows him as Warren. And that is a tremendously strong statement about an individual in politics. So, Mr. Allmand.
Well, Mr. Chairman, fellow panelists, commissioners and trustees, and ladies and gentlemen, I want to start by thanking you very much for inviting me to this conference. It's my first experience at a school board conference, so I appreciate it very much. Now, the name of this panel, Retail Politics, I must say, the first time I ever heard this expression was when I was invited to this meeting about a month or so ago. It's an expression that I was not familiar with at all, and I must say it was sort of misleading to me because I thought it meant we would be discussing the commercial side of politics, which of course is not the case at all. As you can see, our main goal this afternoon is to put forward ideas on how we can better serve the public, increase their participation in political life, improve our communications, be more democratic, and also become more accountable. And all of this to produce a better product, which in your case would be a first-class education system. So those are our goals here this afternoon. However, after listening to Peter and Meili, I don't know if there's much more that I can say. However, since I was involved in 10 elections over 35 years of elective office, I'll try and give you some of my experience. I always believed that elected representatives, whether they were at the federal level, provincial, municipal, or school board level, that they had 4 principal tasks to carry out. The first was to develop policies, public policy for the level at which they represented, to legislate, to set standards, to approve budgets, and to set spending priorities. In other words, the first goal was to legislate. The second would be to oversee and keep a check on the administration, to keep it honest and efficient. In other words, to act as a watchdog for the citizen and the taxpayer. The third task I see as serving as an ombudsperson or an ombudsman for our constituents, to deal with their complaints and criticisms and to get answers for them from the administration. And finally, the fourth task is to be an activist, a problem solver, a generator of ideas and solutions, to be an advocate for change and improvement. Now, in all of these tasks, the elected official must be able to gather and distribute information both ways. That is, information with respect to proposals, plans, issues emanating from the governing body, in your case the school board, and its administration, and to make sure that these policies, plans, etc. are conveyed or handed over or explained to the general public, to the constituency, so that the constituency is fully informed at what's going on in the school board or in the level of government that you represent. And then to listen to and feed back the views of the constituency, their comments, whether good or bad, their objections, their suggested alternatives, and so on what's being proposed or what's being put forward. So the elected official, in my view, should be a two-way conduit of information between the administration on the one hand and the public on the other, explaining, clarifying, advocating. In order to do this well, I believe you must carry out, approach it in three ways. First of all, you must be extremely knowledgeable about the governing body you are part of, i.e. the school board. You must know it inside out. You must know its structure, its constitution, its governing laws and regulations, its officials and departments, the decision-making process, the rules on public participation, how can you appeal decisions. Secondly, you must be in touch with the think tanks and research bodies, in other words, with the best practices, the innovative models, with new approaches and experiments, with pilot projects, and so on, so that you can put forward to the administration and the public the best and newest ideas, which could be about the rights of parents, the status of teachers, class size, curriculum, finance mechanisms, involvement of minorities and the disabled, and so on. In this respect, as a lecturer at McGill International Relations, I'm very familiar with the work done by UNESCO through its conferences, conventions, and declarations and action plans with respect to education, which I think are very valuable. In other words, if you want to be effective and credible, always keep up to date with current ideas and practices. Thirdly, and finally, you must know your constituents. You must know their views and how to reach the constituents. You must be able to reach them and they must be able to reach you. This can be done by, if you have the resources to do so, setting up an office and having office hours, by organizing and holding your own meetings, or by attending meetings organized by other groups in the community, such as town hall meetings and so on. You can do it by newsletters. By the way, I have in my constituency where I live, there are two school commissioners that I know of that are present here, and one of them is very, very loyal in sending out a newsletter about what's happening at the school board. And the other one is also very effective in communicating what's going on at the school board that she represents as well. You can, as mentioned already, I think now have to use, maybe have a website, use email, Facebook and Twitter. Some of you may want to write newspaper columns in the local newspapers, the weeklies, place ads there, and to participate in radio shows, especially where you can make known policies that you think are important to the public, and to solicit their views on those policies over the radio. And also by keeping in very close touch with community organizations. By community organizations, I mean NGOs, the churches, the trade unions, academia, professional and business associations, editorial boards, and so on. Of course, I realize that some of you come from very large districts. Where I represented both at the federal level and the city level, I could go from one end of my riding to the other end in 15 minutes in a car. And although I had about 80 to 90,000 constituents. But I know some of you come from constituencies or school board districts which are very large, where there are many towns and villages, so it's not as easy. You have to get in the car and get out there and drive. And I remember talking to some of my colleagues who represented the Northwest Territories and the Yukon, they could only do it by plane. In any case, all of this to get to know, not only to get to know the views of your constituents, to hear their complaints, but also to pick up their ideas and proposals. Sometimes to work with them on preparing a petition, or setting up a letter writing campaign, or establishing a research project. Sometimes to participate in demonstrations, in rallies, and public forums, to press for new policies or to oppose certain changes. You should also get to know the points of view of other councillors and trustees. Where do they stand on the different issues? What do they campaign on? In this way you can form partnerships with them to get something done, to get their support for motions or amendments and so on. I also think it's a good idea from time to time, thank you very much, I'm just getting over a cold. It's a good idea from time to time to get in touch with eminent persons in your district and to get them to back, if possible, your proposals and ideas, because this will bring more attention to your ideas and proposals and give them more credibility. Finally, when you are consulting and dealing with the public, that is your constituents, make sure that you include all segments of that constituency. And I mean by that the minorities, the racial minorities, the ethnic minorities, the religious and linguistic minorities. That you consult with the immigrant and refugee community, with Aboriginal peoples, with those who represent the disabled and the infirm, with women, with youth and seniors. Now this approach, which I said I've used for over 35 years, if it's to be successful, it's not just for election periods, but it's for the entire term of your mandate. In other words, you start running for office as soon as one election's over, and you do it by all the things I mentioned, by keeping in touch both with the administration and with the constituency. Democracy, in my view, is not just free and fair elections every 3 or 4 years, but it also means ongoing consultation, access to information, transparency, and public accountability. Thank you very much.
Not bad, considering he didn't know the topic and he had nothing to add. Our last speaker at this portion is Sheila Cobbs, who earned her reputation as a don't take no for an answer politician by some of her very public actions when she was a member of Parliament. But she earned the right to do that because everybody in her riding knew who she was. And she cared, demonstrated absolute care and interest in what was going on in her community first. It is a pleasure and an honor to introduce to you Sheila Cobbs.
Merci Marcus, merci à tout le monde. Bienvenue à la plus belle ville, Québec, dans le plus beau pays, le Canada. Et s'il y en a une personne ici qui ne croit pas dans l'importance de notre pays de rester ensemble, if there's anybody who thinks that Quebec is not an important part of Canada, they can just spend a few days walking around this place and breathing the history of what can be done when two peoples and two languages and two cultures and two religions come together and become one country. Being an early adopter, I have my techie going, so I've got my timer on, and I did actually stick to my homework, which is retail politics. I think it was I'm probably going to repeat some of the things that others have said in a slightly different way or with a different take, but I've actually created the COP's 12-point plan to successful retail politics. And if you would like to get a copy of it, as I have it on my Mac, just please email me at sheila@sheilacops.ca in future. Number 1, know your market. You wouldn't buy a shirt without shopping around. And the same thing holds true for being a candidate. Statistics Canada puts out a very good analysis following every census, which gives you a perfect snapshot of what is in your community. Warren is probably the most experienced of all of us, having done 35 elections. I was there for 24 all
10
told.
elections, 35 years.
35 years, excuse me. I did 25, and oftentimes over time your constituency changes. So the updates come. Statistics Canada will drill right down to tell you which Bangladeshi community is in your riding and what particular temple that they might go to, for example. So know your market. Second, know your product. You are the product. You need to have a values-based proposition yourself. Do what is right, not necessarily what is popular. You're the product that you must sell, and if voters trust you, they will overlook individual differences in opinion. One of the questions we were asked in the form that was sent out was, I'm looking at closing a school and I'm struggling with some of the people in my school district who don't want the school to close. Should I represent them or should I represent the bigger picture? Again, values-based proposition. You cannot always satisfy every constituent, but you have to have a view and a direction of where you want to take the school district, and that should be the guide for your actions. Number 3, do the proper preparations. And I think both Meili and also Peter and Warren mentioned this. Elections don't start the day after the writ is dropped. They start the day after the last election. So you've got to do your homework, just like you do in school. Number 4, set achievable goals for each term in office. They should include short, medium, and long-term goals, very specific. Mine were local. It took me 7 damn long years and a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but my local goal was to open the Hamilton waterfront. My national goal, and it was mentioned in the introduction, was about changing the law so that if you want to allow development in national parks, it has to go by an act of parliament. And that also caused me a lot of political grief. It wasn't very popular on the ski hill in Goat's Eye Pass when I said that the footprint of the national parks was under stress and we had to put a zero development piece in place. In the long term, it was the right thing to do, and I can walk away from Parliament literally 8 years later now, knowing that there isn't a single piece of development that can go on in a national park without actually having an act of Parliament. And before that, it was done by ministerial construction. So my international goal was to actually set up a convention for cultural diversity. And some of you are old enough to remember the magazine wars. We got in this huge fight with the Americans because they said that we could not have tax incentives for Canadians to advertise in Canadian magazines, and they took us to the WTO. And at the time, I'm sitting there, I'm getting clobbered. Cabinet, Prime Minister Chrétien's nephew just happened to be the Canadian ambassador to Washington. He had my home number. He called me at midnight and give me shit. I mean, it was, so I was in some political trouble, but I said, you know what? There's got to be a different way of skinning this cat. So I took the world as a globe and I literally divided it into 4 quadrants, picked countries in every quadrant that were politically significant, and ran a campaign to start a world convention on cultural diversity. It was not a French initiative. It was actually an English initiative driven by the fact that the WTO was le décideur en ce qui a trait à la culture. And so what we did was we succeeded in creating a convention at UNESCO which ended up supplanting the WTO's treatment of culture. So if there was a dispute in the future, the dispute resolution process is UNESCO. Anyway, that's for another day. I'm already over my time practically. Okay, 3 achievable goals. Those were my 3. Kiss your constituents. Meili mentioned kissing. Now my kissing is a little different because my kiss is keep it simple, stupid. And I'm the stupid one, okay? People don't necessarily, if they believe in you and they want you to engage, they don't need a big long explanation of everything. They need to know the basics of what it is that you're trying to achieve, and it's a bit like communications and marketing. And I do disagree with, I think somebody mentioned that TV ads don't work. TV ads damn well do work. I went campaigning in the last election for Michael Ignatieff, and I cannot tell you the number of people who repeated verbatim the tagline on the television ad without realizing that, and obviously TV advertising does work because Coca-Cola and Pepsi and governments advertise. So keep it simple, and the principle of getting your message out is it has to be clear. So make it a clear message. Number 6, practice the ask. Now this sounds very silly, but when I was a little kid, my parents came to Quebec for the first time when I was in about grade 7, I think. My father was from Northern Ontario. He was born in Haileybury. And he grew up speaking French in Timmins because his, the Northern, il y a des conseillers de Northern Ontario ici. Anyway, at one time, Northern Ontario was 90% French, and so he started speaking French in Quebec, and I was absolutely fascinated because I'd never heard it, and I said, my God, what a fantastic language. We stayed in a couple of tourist homes, met the people, and I kind of decided right then and there that I was going to learn French, and I was damn well going to learn to speak French as well as I could. I started in grade 9 with the Grey Nuns because I was in a Catholic school. So my first thing was I would practice speaking French in front of the mirror. Now, does that sound stupid? But you know what? It's the same as if you've got, even in your personal life, if you've got a tough decision, let's supposing you've got to meet this constituent and you say, Mrs. Jones, I'm very sorry, but I'm going to have to vote in favor of closing the school for X, Y, and Z reason. Actually practicing what you're going to say in advance to yourself in a mirror and actually role-playing with others who might hear you is a very useful strategy. Most people think question period is just very random. In fact, we all have a rehearsal. We have a dress rehearsal in the morning. The questions are all asked, and actually Warren and I have sat in on sessions where the others who are in the room hear your question and then start firing back sort of pros and cons. So you do a rehearsal, a dress rehearsal, and that's very useful. Network. But I think networking is very good. I don't believe in knocking on doors between elections. I think it's a waste of time. And I will get some disagreement for others. I think what you need to do is you need to prioritize in the networking who you're networking with. There are certain community leaders, if you sit down and have a cup of coffee or a dinner with a community leader who happens to run a church or a synagogue or a temple or a mosque that has 1,000 members, that's a lot more valuable time than knocking on 100 doors where a very skilled politician from another party, an activist, will keep you at their door to debate whatever issue, because it's a smart way of stopping you from going other doors. And I don't know how many times I've gone with politicians during elections, and they will cling to that door assuming that they will convince this one last person. First of all, they start, I am a conservative and I have never voted Liberal in my life. So I'm like, bang, I give them 30 seconds and I'm gone. Why waste my time? A newbie will come up, well, haven't you ever thought about this and haven't you ever thought about that? And they'll be trying to convince them. And I'm there as an old pole, an old crow politician saying, look, you give them 30 seconds. If you can't close the deal, move on. And remember, when you're at the door, close the deal. Don't just say, hello, I hope your son Johnny's doing well in hockey. Will you vote for me? I am counting on your support. Do I have it? You've got to close the deal. Because so many times people will say to you, gee, came to my door, I didn't even ask for my vote. So prioritize who you spend time with. And I do believe media also. Local media is very important. And don't wait for them to call you. If you think you've got an issue, if you think you want to make your point, call a press conference, call an event. I once called a press conference in a garbage disposal, what do you call those? Like a garbage disposal container. And because I'm from Hamilton. Is there anyone here from Hamilton? Anyway, it's hard to get the CBC and CTV that all have offices in Toronto to pay any attention to issues. And I was a provincial politician at the time. And somebody called my office because there were WCB, which is workers' compensation medical documents, flying around the parking lot of a downtown hotel. And I went down, investigated, did my homework. Indeed, the WCB, whose chair just happened to be Lincoln Alexander, who was a former Conservative member, although I can't put the non-shredding on him. But in any case, the WCB had a garbage container full of documents which had the most private details of everybody's medical. So, how to get them interested? I put out a press release and I said, I'm having a press conference at the dumpster tomorrow at 10 o'clock. And it was on the national news in every province. And they had a shredder the next day. So yes, don't be afraid to call them, and also you can just call them and say you want to have lunch. Number 8, never fear failure. Too many, especially women, I believe, refrain from risk-taking because we don't want to fail. Failure is good if you can learn from failure, which leads me to point 9, self-evaluate. Self-evaluate and check out the opinions of others. And I think Peter may mention this before you run. I've never done a poll. I never did a poll in my life. But I do believe in speaking to people to see, are you on the right track? Are you going in the right direction? Would you be a good candidate? And use people's criticism. Be open to criticism. Number 1, don't come and ask somebody their opinion. And then when you actually tell them what they think, they're kind of like, well, I don't agree with that. Take the criticism and use it in a constructive way to improve your product, which is you, your voter popularity, your voter numbers. 9, seek out mentors. Surround yourself. I mean, mentors, in particular for women, when I started off, and it's funny, Warren and I was just chatting, some of you may remember, my daughter was the first baby born to a woman in Parliament, and she's now 25. So when I started out, there weren't that many women that you could go to as mentors, and I think that's one of the things that has prevented us from kind of moving up the ladder as quickly as might like. So seek mentors and surround yourself with people who are positive. Excise negative karma from your life. You can waste an awful lot of time with one person who calls you every day to complain about the same thing. And you might want to return every phone call on a 24-hour turnaround time, but you have to prioritize. Is that person going to just simply be your political poultice? Or are you going to be able to spend time with others? Keep your friends close and keep your enemies closer. I have over time had and I think in your instance, because you're not attached to political parties, it's even easier. I've had some of my bitterest political enemies eventually become my friends. In party politics, it's a bit more difficult because across party lines, you have that separation. But when you're a school trustee or you're a local councillor, nothing prevents you, except in the city of Montreal, the party system is a little bit, but it's still fluid. So keep those enemies closer because you may actually be able to convince them to one day become your friends. Don't write them off. Number 11, say thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you every day in every way, and that means connecting with voters on a regular basis through the use of newsletters, from tweets to town halls. They reinforce your retail reach, and most important, thank your campaign team and build a relationship with them. If it's a cottage party, if it's an annual barbecue, the people that helped you, and especially if you're in a school trustee team, you might have only 25 hardcore volunteers. I go back to '84, I was the only Liberal elected in 7. Is that? Well, including your family, except Peters didn't vote for me. When I was elected in '84, I was the only Liberal elected between Toronto and Windsor, that's 7 million people. And the day of the election, we went through 16,000 lawn signs, and the day of the election, we had 1,000 people out on the street. 1,000. But 25 people, I mean, people say 25 people, do you have a dentist? Do you have a doctor? Do you have an insurance agent? Well, damn it, ask them and engage them. And you'd be surprised, for everyone that you ask, most of the people, when they get involved in politics, they really like it. It's fun. And last but not least, to know where you are going, you must never forget where you came from. The first night that I was elected, I asked people to kick me in the butt, or more precisely, kick me in the ass whenever I got too hoity-toity. And I was subsequently reminded of that once or twice, which was good. More than once or twice. The bottom line is you really do have to have core values and express those core values and remember your roots if you're going to actually go from, I guess, retail politics to political gardening. Thank you very much.
A lot of information, a lot of news there. I'm going to ask if people have questions, if they'd come to the microphone. And I'd like you to please take Sheila Kopp's advice and not provide us with big, long openings and explanations, but if you can get to your question quickly as we're coming close to the end of our session. And we'll start with the front microphone.
Thank you very much. My name is Catherine Faille. I'm Vice President of the Canadian School Boards Association. I want to thank you for your comments. I personally feel that being a trustee, if you can survive being a trustee, you can pretty much do anything in politics. But you touched on the negativity in that the Canadian political scene is going that direction. It's almost more American now, and for me it's un-Canadian. And I'd like for you to comment, please, on the negativity in the advertising, in the attacks, and perhaps provide some insight into how one might deal with that. Thank you.
Who would like to give it a shot?
Well, I think that years ago we actually brought a law in to deal with advertising. And it limits advertising during elections. And we never dealt with the fact that, we never envisioned the fact that we'd be advertising between elections. I think if the theory for the electoral advertising law applies, it should be extended year-round. So if there's a limitation on what you can expend on negative advertising, it should not only hold true for the election period, but overall. And I think we do need some process issues to look at it's very difficult to convince young people how important it is to vote when most of our political credit, our political capital in between elections is spent slagging each other on television for money.
thing is locally in the local newspaper, what happened in my writing is that we've asked the local newspaper to come up with topics in which all party line could comment. So when comes a large issue, when you have in your newspaper 3 columns and everyone's opinion is expressed, I think people have a fair view of everyone's point of view, and then people can make their own mind at home. So I'm not a very partisan of negative politics, so whenever I see it on TV, I just flip it. So, and I'm probably not the only one. And young people, because of my work with them, don't like that. So they laugh at it. But then what's the point? You know, politics is something important. That's what I worked so hard in my 20 years to do, is make politics something important, something fun. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I'm also very much opposed to negative advertising. As a matter of fact, the same thing, my reaction, and I'm talking about elections not at the federal level, or whether it's provincial or municipal, it turns me against the people that use it, especially if it's over the top type negative advertising. It's one thing to point out that, for example, the particular candidate was an incumbent, only was present for 2% or 5% of the sessions, and others do, but some of the negative advertising is just, I think, just terrible, and as far as I'm concerned, in the long run, it doesn't win you votes, it loses you votes, although I guess there's some people that would differ with me on that.
All right, let's move to the second microphone now.
Thank you. My name is Heather McKenzie with Edmonton Public Schools. I appreciate the comments on sticking to your values, as well as participating with your constituents and helping them in advocacy. And I'm wondering how you would suggest we stick to our values and participate with our constituents in advocacy when, as school boards, we're also expected to toe the corporate line, and once a decision is made, there is an expectation on most boards that you will value the decision of the board and go forward. How do you remain responsive in that context and stick true to your values?
Sure. Values are critical. Everybody is judged on what their values are and how well they do stick to them. And what happens at school boards, I assume, like in every other deliberative institution, is that there is a debate. Now, I think these debates should be held in public. Often they aren't. At the bane of our existence, I think, is the so-called work sessions, which everything happens behind closed doors, and when the meeting finally becomes public, it's just a rubber stamp. I don't like that at all. It's not. I'm a Wilsonian. I believe in open decisions, openly arrived at. And with regard to defending your values, you do your very best during the debate at the board. If you lose, you have a decision to make. Is it important enough that you want to resign? And that's something you should consider. Not terribly many people in Canada any longer seem to have the courage of their convictions and resign over an issue. I really admire those few people who do. And if you're prepared to swallow your pride or you've lost, you should absolutely defend the decision of the board. I don't think it does any good at all to carry on a debate in public from within a board once the decision has been made. If you want to resign, you can certainly carry it on and go and launch a campaign to get a whole bunch of them thrown out. That's what I would advise.
I'd like to make a comment on that question. When I was Solicitor General, I had to deal with the issue of the death penalty. And often constituents would say to me, Mr. Allmand, you should do exactly, you should take a poll in your constituency and do exactly as the poll decides. In other words, these things should be decided by referendum. My answer to that was that in the type of democracy that we have, the representative democracy, the member of parliament or the elected person must listen to the arguments of all his constituents, listen to the arguments behind the poll, the people that might be opposed to my point of view, weigh them with other values, and then come to a decision in the best interest of society. In other words, that's the type of system we have. You must listen to the arguments, but sometimes you would get maybe 100 people in the room, 2 may have a very sound argument, and the rest may just be shouting and howling. And it could be the other way around sometimes. So yes, you have to listen to your constituents, but you don't make decisions, in my view, on a basis of public polling. You have to bring values into the situation. And of course, we did vote to abolish the death penalty, and I stood for many elections afterwards, and it never I got reelected. So I think people will appreciate sometimes, even if you disagree with them on a particular issue, if you take the position, explain why you've done it, that you've listened to their views, tried to answer them, but you made a decision, the best as you saw fit in the public interest, then I think they appreciate that.
Maybe I don't understand school boards, but I don't know why you would resign if you took a minority position. I mean, there is no government body that you can point to that operates in unanimity. None. And the idea that somehow you have to kind of fall in line because there's a corporate ethic of coming together, I think that's maybe something that's worth expanding on a little bit more. You have to pick and choose your battles. Let's say you fought the good fight and a school is closed and it's been torn down. Well, that's kind of a dead issue because it's gone. No, but I mean, once it's gone, it's gone. You're not going to rebuild it again. So in that sense, you have to pick and choose your battles. But I also think that if you do feel very strongly and you're in a minority in the school board, there's nothing wrong with that, and you shouldn't have to resign. It's not a unanimous body.
Yeah. When listening to your constituents, like Warren was mentioning, you add up on your research and you add up arguments in your file as well. One thing that is important is to be transparent. I sat on public accounts, and integrity is something that people look up to. So your decision, a hard decision, is that takes long time to make that decision. And if the research is not done properly, and if the message is not sent out properly because you didn't do research, you didn't go out to your constituents or to the people, then there's only one person to blame, is yourself. The picture of the message is the person who is to blame. So if you don't do your grassroots work prior to making a public decision, then you don't know who your allies is, and you don't know if you have the right solution. And Warren was mentioning innovation. Research comes innovation. So if you know that something else happens elsewhere, that might be, by talking to the people, your constituents, you might find a new solution and overturn a hard decision to a good decision for your constituents.
We had promised our panelists that we would release them from our grip by about 5 o'clock, and we're just about reaching that time. So I'm going to ask them, of course, the question that they can't say no to, and that is, would you mind if we extend by about 10 or 15 minutes? And
no. Politicians, we love to talk.
If you want, you can resign. Okay, we've got 3 or 4 people at the microphone. We're going to limit it to those questions, and then we're going to move to some final comments. Here in the front.
Michael Murray from the Eastern Township School Board. In Quebec, the English school boards are linguistic minority school boards. We're elected by universal suffrage of English people, or those who have chosen to place their names on the English electoral rolls, which means in cases such as mine, the school board electors are a small and scattered percentage of the total. What advice would you have for me or others who wish to be elected in that environment where instead of being able to appeal to the majority, we're appealing to a small and disparate minority scattered over a vast territory?
Michael and I are from the same area, and I know Michael very well. Michael managed to get himself elected many, many times, so I think he knows the answer to his question. But I think the answer is really very simple. It's true, and I would say that the model that we have in Quebec is a model for the world. Here we have 2 language groups, completely intermixed and intermingled, and we have 2 separate sets of school boards, and you can adhere to one or the other formally, and that way you become elector of one or the other. We don't go to war over it. We don't fight over it. We don't tear down our neighbors' houses or anything like that. We just quietly go and vote for the school board that we want, and they run the schools that we want. And we do the same in both English and in French. And before that, we did it based on religion. And that wasn't maybe quite as smooth, but it worked. And it always astonishes me why more countries in the world don't follow our model instead of going to civil war. But Michael, I think the very simple answer is you have to go and pick out your constituents one by one, don't you? You have to go where they are and find them. And Sheila, you have to knock on their doors, or maybe you pick up the phone and call them. But Michael's got, I don't know how many constituents you have, but there may be what? 20% or 30% of where we live? Yeah, and you've got to go and find them. and you've got to make sure they get out to vote. Nobody's mentioned get out to vote, but given the tiny turnout for school board elections, the best way of all to win an election is to do nothing at all, stay home the entire election, make sure your name is on the ballot, and then we have the best get out the vote system in the whole world on election day, and you'll astonish everybody, and you'll win.
When I said I didn't believe in knocking on doors, it doesn't mean I mean sitting at home. I actually organized the day after the election. The first day I lost an election, my first election I lost by 14 votes. I announced that night that I was running again, and I started working that week. I organized coffee parties by poll. And I asked a person in each area to host a coffee party, and I gave out flyers in the vicinity asking people to come to the coffee party. And my long-term intention was if they liked my ideas and wanted to support, then those coffee party hosts would become my poll captains. And I built my organization with coffee parties, and in an urban area you can actually do 3 a night if you're tight. You know, 5:30 to 7:30, 7:30 to 9, and 9 to 10 or whatever. But in a rural area, you pick the leader of each, like let's say in Knowlton and whatever. You host a coffee party, get all the neighbors talking, and with intranet you can do it easily. So I do believe in organizing. I just think that when you go straight door to door in between elections, I campaigned with a woman in the last provincial election in Manitoba with John Gerard. She had been knocking on doors for 4 years, didn't have a clue that you could actually walk into a business. And literally she was knocking on doors every night for 4 years, and yeah, she went up from 1,000 to 2,000 or whatever. She didn't win the election, but she didn't have a basic understanding of how to identify the business owners, the small business people, et cetera,
Well, you have to be smart when you're knocking on doors, but I just remind you of the electoral record of Heward Grafty, who I expect both of you knew quite well.
Yeah.
Heward got elected election after election after election because he never stopped knocking on doors, and he was one of usually only 1 or 2 conservatives elected in Quebec.
During an election, I knocked on every door twice during the election when people are engaged. But in between elections, I organized to find the leaders to drive the vote out.
Second microphone.
I love knocking on doors, but there's only so much time, and there's a lot of doors. And my question for you, and I don't think I've heard any politician say this dirty 8-letter word recently, but robocalls, and I'd like to hear how you respond to what role you think. I know that personal telephone calls are more effective, but robocalls hit the mass audience, and I'm wondering if you can share some comments on those.
Want to take the first shot at it?
I don't like robocalls at all. I hang up when I get some. You always have, I don't think it's a big practice in Quebec. I know the Conservatives did it in the last 4 years and tried to convince people on topics, you know, like elderly's pension and stuff like that. But what I get from my constituents was robocalls was just annoying and more annoying coming from political parties. So, but some parties start using it, and we saw what happened in the public. So, I don't believe in robocalls. And I think I come from a riding which I've done 7-8 campaigns before winning my own. So I have about 4,500 emails from my riding, and Facebook followers of 3,500, and these are individuals which I can recall having a conversation with. So I think door to door, one at a time, also pays off on the long run.
Mr. Allmand, did you have a?
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to be totally in accordance with the law. The type of thing that was done in Erwin Copper's riding, where they used robocalls to mislead the electorate, I think is totally unacceptable. It has a place, I suppose, if it isn't totally in accordance with the law, but I particularly don't like them. I share the same opinion as Meili. I find that it's, and especially if it's not the candidate, if it's somebody saying I'm representing candidate XYZ and I'm calling to say this and this and this, it may have more credibility if it was the actual candidate giving you important information, but on the whole, I like to have face-to-face contact with the elector in one way or another, either at public meetings that are as big as this, or one-on-one, or in my office, or door-to-door, or whatever. To me, that's much more effective.
I'm in favor of robocalls done properly, precisely because we live in the 21st century. People don't have a lot of time. I go back to the 1980 election, and Peter will remember this. The Conservatives won government in I think, 20 ridings in Ontario, they were within a margin. No, I'm talking about the margin of making government or not. In 20 ridings in Ontario, they won with margins of less than 1,000. Anything over 1,000, like when Meili was saying she got defeated, if you're blown out because there's a wave, you can be the best MP possible, doesn't matter. If you're going into a tight election, and I said I lost one by 14, I beat the guy the next time by 3,000, the same guy in the same circumstance. If you use robocalls to your advantage, what it permits you to do, and if I were in your shoes, especially the question that came from Eastern Townships, you have a long way to go. So what you do is you run a quarterly robocall invite. It costs you about 5 cents a person, or not even less. I think you can do it for 1 or 2 cents now. I was doing it recently when I was running for the Liberal presidency. You invite people to participate in a telephone town hall. So for like 5 cents a voter, you can send a thing out to every person in your constituency saying, look, I want to talk to you about school board issues, and I'm going to have a call next Monday night. Would you like to participate? And that starts with a robocall, because what the robocall does is it basically extracts the people that aren't interested, and you get the subset of people who are interested, and you actually give them a phone number to phone into, and they phone into, and you have a live town hall meeting over the telephone. And that allows you to connect with them in a way that you'd have to do a hell of a lot of door knocking individually. And it also separates out, if somebody's going to get onto your, if they're going to respond to your robocall and then participate in your telephone call-in town hall, you got a pretty good chance that you might be able to recruit them as a volunteer. So it's like a staged process. But I think it's new technology. I think you have to embrace it. And I mean, if robocalls were going out by the Conservatives on election day en masse, it's because they knew that they were having an effect. And even though people say they hate them, if you watch the effect of negative advertising on voter behavior, it is palpably working. So we may walk away and say, oh, this is terrible, it's horrible, and we're informed political people maybe walk away from it. But if you got a guy watching the hockey game, and in between the second and the third period, somebody comes on and says, this guy's an idiot and don't vote for him a year hence. He doesn't even know who the guy is. The first thing he's ever heard is the guy's an idiot, or a gal, or who this case may be. So therefore, when he sees the person a year later, oh, that's the guy that idiot I saw in the hockey game. No, it's subconscious, they don't even remember it, but it does work. So I think you have to know the technologies and use them positively in an honest way. With not misleading information and stuff, but use them, because if you don't use them, trust me, your opponents will be using them.
I'd just like to say I completely agree with Sheila. I thought maybe I would have to intervene and be the only heavy and the black sheep here and just be realistic about this. We're in the middle of a US election campaign, and anybody who's paying attention, there's nothing except negative advertising. And they do it because it works. Yeah. And robocalls, the NDP used robocalls all across the country in the last election. They work too. You just have to be careful and select it.
Front microphone.
Yes, hi, I'm Anne Capelbianco-Skipworth from our Riverside School Board in Quebec. I feel I'm also not only a commissioner, but I'm also fighting for my existence in this province. What would be your suggestion of how we can conduct retail politics directly with our provincial government?
In Quebec?
In Quebec, yes.
Well, that's always been a challenge. You know, I first came to work for the government here in 1966, and I spent 1.5 years there, and I've been in and out of various things since then. And what I've seen is a gradual decline in the influence of the English community in the government of Quebec since then. And right now, there are hardly any English public servants. There are very few English ministers. I remember at a critical time in the question of the Supreme Court ruling on Bill 101, 3 of Bourassa's English cabinet ministers resigned over it. They resigned on a question of principle, which I thoroughly admire. And I called up a friend I knew who was the clerk of the council in Quebec City, and I said, for God's sake, you know, you can't do this. You've just lost 3 of your English cabinet ministers. And he said, so what? And so we have to recognize that we're fighting from a very weak minority position.
But I'm also talking about not only the English community, but fighting to keep school boards alive and commissioners alive in this province, and both languages.
Well, I'm sure somebody else will jump in, but I'd just like to say we just have to keep fighting. We need to recognize, and there's some of us who still don't, that we are a minority in this province, but we still have minority rights. But like all minorities, you have to fight for your rights. If you don't look after your own campaigns and your own rights, nobody else will do it for you. So we all have to band together and just keep fighting. And in the end, we'll win. If we have to go back to court, we go back to court.
Mr. Allmand.
Yeah, well, that's why in my opening remarks I mentioned we should look to see what's being done in other jurisdictions where there are mixed languages. Switzerland, Sweden, there are other countries where they have several languages and there are minority languages within minority groups within the countries. And do our research and find out what the best practices have been. Find out what the standards are at the United Nations on human rights issues for minority groups. You know, I can remember when Mr. Henderson, I think it was Keith Henderson in around Chateauguay, who always put in his funeral parlor, always had up a bilingual sign and went back several generations. And then he was told to take down his bilingual sign and put up just a French sign. What happened was he went to court, he won in the Quebec Superior Court, saying that that was contrary to freedom of expression under both the Quebec Charter and the Federal Charter. The government went to the Court of Appeal of Quebec. He won 5-0 in the Quebec Court of Appeal. Then the Quebec government went to the Supreme Court of Canada and he won 9-0. Then the Quebec government used the notwithstanding clause to override the decision of the Supreme Court. Mr. Henderson then, with the help of many other people, went to the UN Human Rights Council, who made a judgment that Canada was in violation of the freedom of expression provisions of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights. What happened is that then the Bourassa government amended the law to allow him to put up signs, albeit bigger in French at the top, but in English, smaller in English. But by going that route, by appealing to higher levels, international human rights standards and so on, and looking at best practices in other countries, being well prepared in your dossier, and fighting on those grounds, not simply shouting and howling what you're doing is wrong, but being well prepared and going the limit on your appeals.
That is a great story, Lauren. Thank you.
I understood your question a little bit differently. What you're looking at is if you're irrelevant and you cost money, get rid of you. Overall, it's not a French-English issue, it's an issue of survival politically. And I'm looking at it from the point of view of the provincial government, which is also squeezed because for many, many years, the education system in Quebec, both certainly at the cégep and university level, has been underfunded in terms of personal investment, et cetera, et cetera. We've all seen the number of kids in the streets, and surprising to me, you know, I think 26% of the colleges actually were on strike and the balance weren't across the province. That's shocking to me because when I saw the media, I basically have seen mostly only the people that were on strike. I saw some school superintendents who were also put in very difficult positions because they had students coming in and they didn't know whether to keep the place open, and the provincial government was saying keep it open, but then there were people breaking windows, et cetera, et cetera. If you're in a difficult situation, the first thing, like in that circumstance, that would have been an opportunity, albeit political, and you are political, for the provincial government to get some support from school boards on the necessity of increased investment in your education system. And nobody said a word. So, if you want to survive, you have to also speak up for the political process when the time comes. And I've always been very blunt. I remember having a meeting with Gerald Darroze in my office, and he just about fell off his chair because I was, and I think those who worked with me in culture in the province of Quebec, I was well respected by all sides. And Gerald Darroze came in and he said, okay, I think he was from Chateauguay, no? Anyway, there was a D&D factory closing down, and he wanted a $20 million federal government investment to refabricate it because apparently you can make women's makeup and nail polish and stuff out of war leftovers. The same stuff that they use for like bombs are actually used in making nail polish and stuff. So they wanted to do this retrofit. Anyway, it was for beauty factory products or whatever. Anyway, and so Gerald Darroze, after years of, you know, crapping all over us and wanting to break up in the country, is sitting in my office, and I said, Gerald, I said, that's a little bit strange. In French, we had a conversation. I said, you want $20 million from my government, and then you want to break up the country. He goes, well, what does that got to do with it? Well, I said, you know, I don't understand. To me, there's a relationship between the fact that 90% of your time is spent out there trashing the existence of my country, and now you come cap in hand wanting $20 million for a Department of National Defense retrofit. Well, I'll tell you, the bureaucrats were just about jaw-dropped because they hadn't had that many people who'd actually spoken bluntly on an issue. I mean, it's like that whole business of sovereigntists. They're not sovereignists, they're separatists. They want to separate from the country. And I read a column in the Hill Times, and I still call them what they are. And I mean, you can come and kiss and be all nice, as much as nice as you want. But the bottom line is, you have to call a spade a spade. And okay, I know, I'm getting political. And I'm even retired. So, all that to say, when governments need help and voices, if you're there at that time, you're a damn sight better positioned to get what you want in the long term. But if you all mouse around and wait for the next budget to be, you know, called and do it all in the back rooms, it doesn't always work.
Last question.
Ed Hume, I'm a school trustee in Meili in Winnipeg. My question is somewhat similar to one of the other ladies' questions, dealing with the whole issue of your allegiance as a school trustee to you as a political elected representative to the community or to the corporate body. I'm going to just expand it just a bit. I see it happening in federal politics where the same type of thing where people, rather than being able to express their ideas freely and openly, there's some that corporate body attitude forces individuals to kind of go along maybe with the others, even though they may not agree with it. They're basically kind of told to kind of shut up and go along with it kind of thing, or feel that kind of pressure. And I really think that that's not a very democratic process. And I guess my question is, and I'm a rookie trustee and I'm dealing with this issue of how do I maintain a balance between trying to be, you know, as we're talking about, decisions are made by the board, be supportive, but on the other hand, if there's other things which haven't been dealt with, if you feel you have a need to express that in public or to the press, this type of thing, in my experience, I found that it's very difficult to do that, because if I go and I do that type of thing, then I have to decide, am I going to lose support with the present group that I'm working with? And you're kind of walking a tightrope, because if I have a desire to express my democratic rights and represent the public, but on the other hand, there's the corporate body, and I wrestle with that, and that's my question. How can you balance that?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, well, at the federal and provincial level, where we have political parties, it's much more difficult. I understand that in school boards you don't have political parties, but from what you say, you still feel a certain responsibility to the group that you're working with. Well, I've always taken the position that your first responsibility is to your constituents, not to the political party, and not to the people that you're working with. You've got to, after studying the issue, decide what's best for the constituency, for the school board, and for the students and the teachers and so on in your district. And if you feel honestly after study that that's what you should do, that's what you should do. And I think in the long run you'll gain more respect from your colleagues, even though they may not like it when you go against them on a particular issue, but I think in the long run you'll have more respect.
I see a lot of head nodding, so if I can take from that most of our panelists would agree with that comment. What I'd like to do...
Can I just, one last, because I think the other thing is you're a newbie, right?
Yes.
You're a newbie. And a lot of times newbies are very idealistic. I'll give you one example. When I first got elected to Queen's Park, we had a motion to have a pay raise or something. And we just came in and the whole thing, oh, Don Boudry and I both decided that we would vote against the pay raise, which was made us rather unpopular with all our colleagues. And probably in retrospect, as I got more experienced, I realized how stupid that was, because A, we didn't defeat the thing anyway, and B, we ended up like other people that have been waiting for raises because they hadn't had them in 10 years or whatever. It's very nice to be right, but it's also nice to have friends. So I guess it's a bit of a balance, and you have to pick and choose your issues, is what I'm saying. As a newbie, sometimes you'll go for all the issues, but don't go for all the issues.
What I'd like to do, sorry.
Like a new
What I'd like to do is ask each of our panelists for a final word, and maybe if they can work it to 30 seconds each, Do you believe that there is a way for us as school board trustees and commissioners across this country to find a way to raise our profile with the general public?
I would like to start.
I was afraid of that.
Preston Manning used to speak to university audiences, he may still do, and found them completely disinterested in politics. And he would say to them, listen, if I were Prime Minister of Canada and I controlled a majority in the House of Commons, I could pass a law whereby each one of you would have to serve in the army for 5 years. Now think about that. I think the way to get people interested is to talk about things that really concern them. If you want to start a debate, there's two surefire issues. One is language and the other is religion. And if you want to start debates on that, I have a thing here that somebody sent me just today about the fact that he thinks that it's shocking that the Lord's Prayer is no longer permitted in schools in some cities in Canada. I know that that's a huge debate, but there's a debate. You want to get people interested, there's a way to do it. Start a debate on issues that are critically important to people. And are we getting value for money? The taxpayers that pay for our schools, are we getting value for money? There's a debate for you.
Sheila Cobbs.
I think you have to take a page from the book of the successful political parties, and you have to invest in a strategic plan for communications. And that means paying somebody at the national and provincial level to figure out what your message is and going forward. Right now, the Ontario government has come out with a bunch of cuts, and the doctors and the nurses are running campaigns, and they're very effective. And I think the school trustees, and certainly the education system, or at least should be doing the same thing.
Or no.
When I was a member of Parliament for many years, people often used to go up to me on the street and say, Warren, what does your boss think about this? Or why did your boss do that? And I said, who do you mean? They say, Mr. Trudeau. I said, he's not my boss, you're my boss. And this is the kind of thing you've got to continue to keep in mind. The boss is the people that elect you. You're responsible to them. If you keep that at the top of your mind day in, day out, when you're a school commissioner, when you're a provincial member, that you serve those people. You do not serve the party. You do not serve the administration. You're serving the public good and the people that represent you, the taxpayers. Keep that in mind. They're the boss.
Meili, Faille, last word.
Thank you. Actually, from all my speech, what I wanted you to retain was to enjoy what you're doing. Enjoy rethinking your campaign strategies. So that should be part of the way you should be acting today. Is don't be scared to change. Don't forget why you're doing it and what you want to achieve. And don't forget your allies. Don't forget your people. They are your boss. They are the people who elected you. And I put here a little note that someone wrote to me. A constituent told me once, I like somebody who grows and learns. And that's exactly what you've done. And today's testimony from Marcus, I almost cried, and I tried to retain all my tears, but I'm very honored to have done the job of a member of parliament, that have done politics and still doing politics, because my grassroots was to defend people. And I tackled some issues that no other parties at the federal level wanted to tackle. I helped the Lost Canadians. If you Google Lost Canadians, Canadians born in Canada that lost citizenship due to law. And that was not very popular, but I used my 20 years experience working in Ottawa with the Conservatives, with the Liberals, with senators, with MPs, and campaign. I think if you want to survive, you have to go off a lot of political opinion and be more general on some topics and research and come with the facts. So the Liberal government at the time didn't want to fix the law, citizenship law. So we had a Conservative member of the Senate to bring in the change in the legislation. Because I'm the bloc member, we don't have a Senate member. But I know the process. I know the law, the rules at the House of Commons. So we were able to draft the law to make a change.
Working with Andrew Tillagsley, remember?
Yeah.
Yes.
And we were rocking the Citizenship Committee. And then on public accounts, the same thing with another colleague. So I think, depending where you come from, it is a liberal at the time, yes, but it was a liberal government too. Oh, okay. Then Andrew and I were fighting against the liberal government too. So, and it was a conservative bill that came through. So anyway,
Well, we've covered the whole. Covered the whole house.
So I think that's it. That's exactly what you have to do. Do things from your heart and what you believe in. People want you to defend you. People want you to represent them when they're not seeing and overseeing what is happening on a day-to-day life of what is happening in school boards. So, have a safe return home, and thank you for your attendance.
I think you'll agree this was an incredible closing plenary session, and on behalf of the Canadian School Boards Association and the organizing committee, a very special thank you to Sheila Copps, Warren Allmand, Meili, Faille, and to Peter White. And ladies and gentlemen, banquet tonight. Enjoy the next hour or so as you get prepared, and we'll see you all later. Thank you very much.